Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. We have a good one for you, as always, on the show today. Donald Trump, seeking to show Republican unity, has a big meeting with top Republican lawmakers. We'll take a look at the reaction from them and try and speculate about how the meeting went and what it means for the future of the Republican Party heading into the 2024 election. Also, the interest rates have remained the same. The Federal Reserve has announced today. Here is what that means for you. It's a lot of economic jargon. We will break it down into things that really are actionable in your life. Also, a really interesting phenomenon is happening. Democrats are continuing to outperform Biden in key states in polling. In races for the Senate. We'll try and delve into why that is. Interesting New York Times story about it. I will offer my analysis on the very, very important subject. This honestly is pretty simple. And also we have a look at what comes next after Benny Gantz resigns from Israel's war cabinet. A very interesting and important situation as we continue today. All very important stuff, as we hope for a good show, and thank you very much for joining us here on Newsflash. All right, so it was a pretty big moment in Capitol Hill today. We had President Trump returning to Washington, meeting with congressional leaders. This will be his first trip to meet with top GOP lawmakers since a jury found him guilty, of course, on all 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in his New York hush money case, making Trump the first former U.S. president convicted of a crime since that historic guilty verdict. However, Republicans have largely fallen in line behind Trump as he and President Biden continue to be locked in a tight race. So this is, again, because of these charges, because of, I think, what has been priced in with a lot of different voters about Trump, is something they just kind of assume when they deal with him, that, they're going to get a little bit of criminality. They're going to get something in the way of a thing that, it's probably not exactly what a president should be doing. Although, some people, according to a focus group, a very interesting New York Times focus group, reacted to this by essentially saying there was kind of a clip, or I guess a screenshot of a paragraph that was going around online, essentially saying that, Trump, it's not the craziest thing for someone to do, but if he's a billionaire and he can't pay, I think this person wasn't even, was kind of an undecided voter, and he was just like, he essentially said, a couple of people have mentioned a massive judicial conspiracy of everyone going after him. Okay, let's talk conspiracy math here. The sheer number of people who have had to have been working together to get something like this just boggles the mind. Have you ever tried to get 4 people to agree on what to order for pizza? I just don't see this working out. At the end of the day, okay, fine. I'm going to side with Jonathan on this, saying, what's the big deal about bribing Stormy Daniels? But I want a president who's going to be able to cover up a $130,000 bribe to Daniels. If he can't pull that off, I'm not going to trust him with a nuclear football. This seems like such an easy thing for him to screw up. I'm kind of leaning towards Biden now. So this is a perspective of Ben, a 42-year-old white college advisor from Texas. So, just gives you a little a taste in the water. It's not some major, thing where people are just like, this is absolutely unacceptable. A convicted felon can never be president, and he's dropping like 5-10 points in the polls. Maybe Biden's bouncing up a little bit in some of the states where you have kind of older, whiter voters playing a bigger role. Especially those in the Midwest, like places like Wisconsin, Michigan, some states that he absolutely needs to win to cross the line. But a very, very big thing is this has not been, the massive surge in Trump's direction that a lot of, or Biden's direction that a lot of people on the Democratic side, I don't even think Biden really assumed this, but kind of hoped that it would be. Which is, it's kind of a crazy thing, but, people just view Trump differently than they view every other politician. He's not the same. He's not in the same category. That's why he, A, I think was able to be indicted when we see no other president be indicted before, but it's also, B, why he's able to have so much longevity and have a different relationship to the electorate than everybody else. Asked Wednesday if he had spoken to Trump about committing to a peaceful transfer of power. Mike Johnson of Louisiana said, of course Trump respects that, and we all do. We're very excited to welcome President Trump back. There's high anticipation and great excitement, and I feel good, Johnson said. It's very ringing words right there. Sure he really feels them. I mean, I think he is kind of a true believer, in the Republican gospel. So I think it's not something like, a person we're about to get to who is definitely not somebody who is a true dyed-in-the-wool Trumpist. But anyway, he said later that the GOP lawmakers were anxious to talk about plans after November and bounce ideas around with Trump tomorrow. So he's meeting with the House Republicans tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. at the Capitol Hill Club, followed by another meeting with the Senate Republicans, also very near the Capitol, at 12:30 p.m., trying to essentially work to found out and, try to just shoot policies off, I guess. But Scott Perry of Pennsylvania said, I don't know what the purpose of Trump's visit is. I found out about it, but we're happy to entertain the former president. It's going to be great. So small and moderate House Republican had to speak anonymity, saying they're bracing for chaos. Some moderate Republicans are contemplating not attending, possibly stunting Trump's attempt to unite the Congress, but let's not be fooled here. The Republican Party is completely behind these people, and I think there's no better explanation of it, no better demonstration of it than comments from this man right here, Mitch McConnell.
Should we continue the tradition?
We should. Tomorrow you're going to the NRSC. First time. You haven't spoken to Trump since December 2020, from what we understand. Do you plan to confront any of the bad blood between the two of you, or any of the issues you had, including over January 6th?
I said 3 years ago, right after the Capitol was attacked, that I would support our nominee, regardless of who it was, including him. I've said earlier this year, I support him. He's earned the nomination by the voters all across the country. And, of course, I'll be at the meeting tomorrow.
So there you have it. That's a big thing, because after the Capitol riot, he did have a chance to move through an impeachment on Trump that would have barred him from running for office again. He did not do that. Mitch McConnell did not do that. He eventually was forced to take Trump's side again when the Republican swine base spoke their mind in the primaries, and now here he is, stuck with what is very, very likely another 4 years of a man that pretty much everybody thinks that he absolutely despises. All right, next on Newsflash, big news from the Federal Reserve. They're expected to keep their benchmark interest rate unchanged, at least until there are clearer signs, or they will keep their benchmark interest rate unchanged. It was announced today, until there are signs that inflation is growing more slowly. But the forecasters will be listening to Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, for any clues about how much longer they expect to keep rates at relatively high levels. That's kind of old script there from the New York Times. It is clear that he is most likely, at the most, he's going to consider one more time, or at least one lowering of the interest rate this year. It's a very, very big policy. And just with regards to the inflation situation, it's becoming increasingly clear that we are seeing, relatively cooling inflation with, the broader picture, as it was really, really big, just generally with the kind of bundle basket that the government does to determine how much that bundle of goods costs year over year or month over month, and that cost is essentially that cost either dropping or decreasing and how much it's increasing, if that makes any sense, is what the inflation rate is. But if you zero in on that, we have food prices, we have gas prices, and we have house prices that have been really artificially manipulated by corporate landlords, and one time using AI algorithms to price gouge everybody. There's just been a big raid on a corporate landlord site by the FBI, a facility there that they kind of searched and, I don't want to say ransacked, but looked through. Did the whole Trump Mar-a-Lago treatment on, but they also, they have similar situations with kind of food prices that have been very sketchily manipulated by companies, and of course, evidence of consolidation between OPEC and U.S. gas producers in, the fracking and all that stuff to manipulate gas prices, especially ahead of the election. And that is really what is causing inflation. And by the way, if you want to know why, people say the economy is so bad, but it's really so good, it's because if you take those three things and you look at inflation year over year, it's not like 3 or 4% or whatever it is now. It's 25% since the start of the Biden presidency. And that is a big deal because that's what the cost people pay attention to most. And, for some reason, fast food has also gone up, and Americans are fat asses and eat a lot of fast food. So that's also playing a big role. I'm not going to deny it. But those three things, which Biden has done nothing to combat, nothing to mitigate in any serious way, are incredibly influential in how people experience inflation and why, the inflation rate for a lot of people has not gone down. And, Biden hasn't really done anything about it. So the Fed here is holding the rates steady. It'd be interesting to see what impact that has on unemployment. A lot of people have been saying that for a long time, but it still has been held pretty solid. But to the question of what it means here, this is in New York Times. For money for people with money to stash away in higher yielding savings accounts, a continuation of elevated rates translates into more interest earnings. But for people saddled with high cost credit card debt or aspiring homeowners who have been sidelined by higher interest rates, which is a big group of people, a lower rate environment can't come soon enough. So that is a big, big thing. The housing market with the mortgage rates, that is a big problem. Shopping around, whether you're looking for an auto loan, a credit card, a personal loan, or any other type of loan, can make a huge difference, the interest rates, said the Matt Schultz, who's an analyst at LendingTree. Here's how the difference kind of rates are. So credit cards are very closely linked to central banks' actions, which means that consumers with revolving debt have seen those rates quickly rise over the last couple of years. Increases occur within 1 to 2 billing cycles, but don't expect them to fall quite as rapidly, even when the rates eventually decline. The urgency to pay down credit card debt is not diminished, said Greg McBride. Interest rates took the elevator going up, but they're going to take the stairs going down. So essentially what they're saying is they know there will be a lot of demand because people are going to rush to see when those interest rates go, my interest rates are going down. Maybe my credit card interest rate is going to go down as well. The credit card companies then are going to say, well, those people think that, we'll still charge them interest rates for a little extra longer, which is, pretty scummy. The way a consumer can get around that is to prioritize repayment of higher cost debt and take advantage of 0% and low rate balance transfer offers when you can. The average rate on credit cards with assessed interest was 22.63% at the end of March, according to the Federal Reserve, compared with 20.92% a year earlier and 16.17% at the end of March 2022 when the Fed began a series of rate increases. Auto loans have remained elevated, which has squeezed affordability and dampened demand among would-be car buyers, but automakers and also, by the way, inflation and car costs of those cars have gone up a lot, but begun offering more discounts and other incentives, which has lured some buyers back into the market. In May, we saw positive news on the sales front, said Aaron Keating, who's the executive analyst for Cox Automotive. A lot of these sales are juiced by higher incentives and lower prices, which is good news for consumers worrying about inflation. The average rate on new car loans was 7.3% in May, according to Edmunds, up from 7.1% in 2023 and 5.1% in 2022. That's a big drop there. Used car rates were even higher. Average loan carried 11.5% in May, up from 11% in 2023, and then 8.2% in 2022. Car loans tend to track with the yield on the 5-year Treasury note, which is influenced by the Fed's benchmark rate, which is also a big reason why, if you remember a few years ago when the interest rates started to go up, we saw some banks that had kind of invested heavily in that note. When the interest rates went up, that note, 5-year Treasury note kind of crashed in value. So the banks were in a lot of trouble there. But that also plays a big role in car loans, tracking with the yield on the 5-year Treasury note. And that is not the only factor that determines how much you'll pay. A borrower's credit history, type of vehicle, the loan term, and the down payment are also baked into the rate calculation. So, but it will be a big thing for car loans when the interest rate does go down. Mortgage rates have also remained elevated. The most popular loan crossed 7% mark in mid-April and has largely maintained that stance ever since, making home ownership an even costlier proposition. Mortgages don't really always have as much of an effect. The 30-year fixed-rate mortgages don't move in tandem with Fed's benchmark, but instead generally track with the yield on the 10-year Treasury bonds, which are less influenced by the Fed's actions on interest rates and more about just general investor reaction kind of trends. Other home loans are more closely tethered to the central bank's decision. Home equity lines of credit and adjustable rate mortgages, those are much more tied because the rate changes more often to the interest rate. Student loans are, so if you already have a federal loan plan, that is not influenced because it's fixed rate. But for the newbies out there, my fellow or kind of recent new graduating class borrows with federal undergraduate loans disbursed after July 1st, but before July 1st, 2025, will pay 6.53%, up from 5.5% for loans disbursed in the same period a year before. So yeah, not very fun stuff at all there. Let's hope those loans go down pretty soon. Senate Democrats are outperforming Biden in a big way. We have this coming in from the New York Times analyzing a trend that a lot of people have been noticing for a long time, talking about Tammy Baldwin far away from parades and gatherings in Madison and Milwaukee and at a dairy farm in Republican Richmond County. So that's one of the things that Baldwin is doing, but it just goes throughout the list here. Baldwin, I think a lot because these people are very good campaigners. Baldwin is first openly gay senator. I didn't actually know that. First state of Wisconsin. So first openly gay senator. That's a big difference there. But she was not in the big city. She was out rallying the crowd. She is running well ahead of the president and pursuing Republican opponent, the wealthy banker Eric Hovde. Polls released last month by the NYT saw Baldwin up 9 over Hovde in Wisconsin. The nonpartisan Cook political report put the spread even wider at 12 percentage points. And let's just put it, I don't know the exact number, but Biden, I think, is losing to Trump right now in Wisconsin. And meanwhile, we have the other states essentially looking the same in Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. A Marist poll released Tuesday said that Trump led Biden in Ohio by 7 percentage points, but Sherrod Brown off the top rope, the Democrat with a kind of the union ties, but also a little bit socially conservative, paying a little bit of tribute, I guess, or kind of catering to the very religious undercurrent, the kind of Catholic undercurrent in Ohio. I shouldn't say Catholic, honestly. I'm not entirely sure, but I just know it's very, very religious, very maybe evangelical, but kind of anti-abortion. And so Sherrod Brown has been kind of playing a little bit to that crowd, even though the Ohio yes vote on abortion or the yes on abortion, I guess, in the Constitution passed or I think it's going to be up in November, but it passed a key vote earlier this year. In a memo of warning shared with donors, Americans for Prosperity Action, a conservative group focused on helping Republicans reclaim the Senate, said in states with heated Senate races, voters deeply held a deeply negative view of Biden, but positive views of their Democratic senators. It's still early in the race, but we see some signs of this, some of the same warning signs we saw in 2022, said spokesperson Bill Riggs. Voters are not connecting the Democratic Senate candidates to the top of the ticket, and Biden has not become the drag you expect. And that is because we have really seen, this is the story of 2022 as well. Somebody with deep unpopularity and kind of just a deeply ineffectual leader kind of plays into feelings that voters have. A very weird, but honestly, when you think about it, kind of rational given the circumstances and given really how people aren't going to spend all day trying to understand the inner workings of politics. They see, okay, my president is doing nothing, but when I'm considering the Senate race, I don't like him. He's always weak on the world stage. And there's also, I think, things about Biden that make him especially unappealing to a lot of people in these swing states, especially, just as a candidate standalone, he's going to have a very negative approval rating. But if you look at the Republicans and the Democrats, which is really what these kind of Senate races are about, with much less name recognition, much more party identity, party brand over personal identity, personal brand. You have the Republicans on one side, and oftentimes the candidates really run this way too, as just very zealous socially, very, pro-Trump, stop the steal in 2022. I'm sure that's going to play, a bit of a role in 2024. The Republican Senate candidates are just incredibly extreme, especially on social issues, whether it be abortion, whether it be in 2022, a lot of the, CRT, the anti-woke stuff. And that's that's definitely to come back in 2024 in some way, shape, or form. I think it's going to be a lot more, though, about migrant politics, which could have a little bit more of a bite. But they see essentially the Democrats as a party that is standing against the Republicans overreaching on social issues, using extremism and just, pushing the country, not just conserving the way things are, but actively pushing the country backwards. I think is a big step that a lot of people are not fans of in any way. And I think that's definitely what happened in 2022. I'm not really familiar as much as I should be with the Republican candidates running against these guys in 2024. I think a lot of them, from what I've heard, are going to be more moderate than the people who ran in those same seats or the same areas in 2024. I know Doug Mastriano, though, is trying to go again for Pennsylvania. That would be the Democrats' dream come true. But it is a very, very big thing. Just the Democrats being normal and the Republicans just being the weird party that is trying to, again, not conserve the way things are, but actively take the country backwards, make it just, again, weirder, make it more extreme. And, the Republicans have gone from the party of just having fun, I think, as well, to the party of just, being a little bit too crazy and just kind of going off on things that you're just like, we're enjoying. It used to be the liberals, right? When you're kind of sitting in a bar and you're in a group and then there's this crazy liberal friend that you have that's kind of going off, just, okay, so this is how I'll explain it. It's like, say you're sitting in a bar with, the Tammy Baldwin, who's the very chill, relatively moderate Democratic candidate who's, just out in some dairy farm having a good time. And then you're sitting there with somebody like, I don't know, like Doug Mastriano. Like, you would think that Tammy Baldwin, as, the lesbian from the big cities of Wisconsin, would be going off on some kind of like liberal rant. But she's a much more moderate person. And you turn to Doug Mastriano, who looks like, the perfect, American conservative type candidate. And then all of a sudden he's just ranting about how Trump is like a godlike figure, like Caesar or something. And then we have to save the world from like the lizard people Democrats. And it's just like, what? I'm not going to vote for you. It's crazy. I think that's what a lot of people are feeling. It's just disconnection, out of touch from reality. Even though, the one person who got blasted or quoted in the New York Times, he blasted the rich Republican candidate for just having too much money and from being out of town. It's just like this lack of connection is a very, very big deal. Republican Senate candidates dismiss any concerns as well. Bernie Moreno, the spokesperson for Bernie Moreno, said that he was just a victim of a brutal primary season, which was a death spot for any incumbent, saying that Sherrod Brown was vulnerable. Dave McCormick, a Republican, Dave McCormick is the more moderate guy who's going to be challenging Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, according to the New York Times poll, which has Casey at 46% to McCormick's 41%. Incumbent senators with Bob Casey's poll numbers at this point almost always lose, and he will too. On the policy front, they're far less encumbered by the controversies that have the president crosswise between his party's left flank and the broad center of the electorate. Of course, some classic New York Times framings here. Voters, by and large, don't expect their Senate candidates to shape U.S. foreign policy in Israel, nor do they hold a porous U.S.-Mexican border against them. They just say, oh, here's a random person. They don't blame her for all the things they blame President Biden for. This is Pam Flake, who's a retired educator and Democrat in Richland Center, Wisconsin. Let's see if I can find any more. Just scrolling through this article here. We're so darn busy, we don't pay attention to politics, offered Sherry Nelson, who co-owns the Huff Nelson's farm that hosted Sunday's dairy breakfast, along with her husband, Larry Nelson. She added that Baldwin is doing a fine job. On the presidential contest, Nelsons were both extremely disappointed on their choices. It was a flip of the coin for them. They said that is about it. So pretty telling, pretty interesting mindset there from a lot of the people who are really going to be deciding this election. And just they view the Senate Democrats and Democratic brand, I think, as a whole, as much more normal and about just keeping things relatively the same. And then when you have a party that's just screaming about how we're going to take things just backwards and make them weirder and make you have like less rights and more openly Christian society, it's not going to turn out well. It just is not for them electorally. All right, next on the show today, we have an interesting report from Mondoweiss. This is by Qassam Wadi. 8 months into Israel's genocidal war on the people of Gaza, Israel's war cabinet is beginning to break up. The resignation of opposition leader Benny Gantz from the cabinet last Sunday came after weeks of anticipation. Gantz announced his resignation after he had given Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu an ultimatum to put forward a post-war plan in mid-May. In a televised statement, he accused Netanyahu of preventing Israel from winning a real victory in the war by obstructing important decisions for his own political gain. Gantz forced his support for the U.S. ceasefire and prisoners exchange proposal and called for early Israeli elections. He also called for other politicians to withdraw from the cabinet. One of the members who quit the cabinet was Gadi Eisenkot, who is another centrist figure from the Israeli military establishment, who authored the infamous Dahia Doctrine. Again, this is who's centrist in Israeli society after the 2006 Lebanon war, which is essentially the Dahia Doctrine, which is very, very well known. Is named after the village in Lebanon that Israel destroyed to essentially scare any sort of future civilian resistance, which, obviously did not work and killed. It was just a crime after crime after crime. So the biggest impact of Gantz's resignation is that there are now two different visions within Israeli politics of how the war should end. The first would have the war continue indefinitely with the inachievable goal of destroying Hamas and refusing any halt, even if temporary, to the fighting. This is represented by Netanyahu with his, and by the way, just get the hostages back by force, and kill as many Palestinians as possible, which is exactly why, this was such a big victory, with the hostage rescue over the weekend. Not only did they do it through, if they'd done it through peace, Netanyahu would have been disappointed. He wanted Palestinian bodies leaving in a trail on the way out. Like, that is what plays well for him in Israel. Gantz is much more kind of the more, liberal side. Let's take a break, get the hostages back, and then go back to killing them. So second, essentially they say would prioritize a captives exchange deal that inevitably leads to an end in the fighting, but which critically may resume halfway through the agreement by finding a pretext to sabotage it. The unity government that came together at the start of the war began to fracture as the months passed without achieving the war's stated goals. Internal political tensions reached a boiling point as the cost of the war and the casualties increased, including announcements that Israeli captives had been killed by the Israeli army. Discontent manifested in the streets of Tel Aviv as the number of protesters demanding Netanyahu's resignation and a prisoner exchange grew exponentially. Israel's failures throughout the war are reflected on the ground and in the international stage. In Gaza, Israel exhausted all its military choices without achieving any of its goals. Hamas, as a governing body, has not only survived so far, but is filling the void left by the withdrawal of Israeli troops. Its military wing, alongside a number of other Palestinian guerrilla groups, continues to fight across the Strip, inflicting losses on Israeli forces daily. Internationally, Israel is accused at both the ICJ and the ICC. Israel has suffered a number of diplomatic crises with several Latin American and African countries, while European states have recognized the state of Palestine. And, most importantly, Israel has failed to drag the international community into shutting down UNRWA or accepting the mass expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza. While, it is unimaginable how bad the suffering of Gazans has been. It is unimaginable. I think it's very clear it could have been worse. And I think that is for the resistance, only for the resistance of the Palestinians, and in part by some of the resistance from people all across the world, essentially refusing to go quietly, refusing to, go into Egypt, for example, refusing to, be displaced from their cities without a fight. It has been very, very clear. Until this moment, the majority of Israelis support continuing the war, said Razi Nabluse, a political analyst and researcher. However, the percentage of those in favor of a prisoner exchange deal, even if it means ending the war, is growing exponentially, reaching 47% in Israeli polls. The division among Israelis around a ceasefire deal is also an ideological one. On the right, they think that since more soldiers have been killed than there are captives, it makes sense to stop the war without achieving its goals, only to release the captives through a deal. On the more liberal center, they think it makes no sense to continue to sacrifice soldiers and potentially kill more captives when they can be released through a deal, and that the individual's lives are more important than the war objectives, which are clearly not being achieved. So it's unlikely Gantz's resignation will bring the downfall of Netanyahu, Nablusa pointed out, simply because all the members of the right-wing government coalition with a 64-seat majority in the Knesset understand that the right is too weak now because the war and its unfolding results is not in their interest to go to elections now. However, it's also unlikely that Netanyahu will bring his far-right allies like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich to the war cabinet. Rather, he will dissolve the war cabinet and direct the war from the regular government, where he has a majority of allies. In short, the war will be more homogenous, but with greater pressure from the opposition. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out because, again, he will have more control, but then he won't have the legitimacy of, oh, look, there's moderates in the war cabinet, we're a completely unified group, and that could lead to more fractures within the Israeli state. Definitely something to keep a very, very close eye on, as it really could determine the future of the region. And with that, we are done for today. This has been Newsflash.